Hello and welcome to episode 31 of We'll Review It Ourselves, the podcast where we review the movies on our shelves. Every 2 weeks we'll take a randomly selected movie from our collections and we'll review it ourselves. I'm Brian Morgan, not recording from my regular location. I'm traveling for business and in a hotel room, so if you hear any weird background noise, that might be what it is. And joining me... That is not the background noise we're talking about.
Norman? What's that noise, Norman?
I will say that as I was pulling in to check in, about 6 tour buses rolled up to the hotel, and I watched about 180 or so older couples, let's say, in their 60s and up, just sort of trundle off the bus and come in and start their check-in. Luckily, I got in before them, so it wasn't that big of a deal. But yeah, it was crazy. But joining me from what I assume, based on the visuals from our FaceTime call, is his usual location in sunny Southern California is...
Well, that's me. I'm Dan Bergman. Hi.
Yay.
Hey.
All right. We are coming off of our 30th episode, which was Blade Runner 2049, and we received a little bit of listener feedback, and it was from listener Jeff Edwards, who said, "This is your best episode yet. Brilliant." So apparently the listener request random pick episodes are kind of cool, and it was a good episode to do it on. So
yeah, it's a thing now. So
yeah, it's a thing. It's a thing. 4 more episodes, and we'll do another one. So on that note, I would like to encourage our listeners to continue to submit your requests, and we will add them to the list. So that's it for listener feedback, and we are talking today about Pinocchio, or as it is more commonly pronounced, Pinocchio. I did find it amusing that on the futuristic sci-fi film, that's the first time that the text-to-speech function on the computer mispronounced a name. That is pretty awesome. Just kind of ironic.
I'm surprised nobody's ever used that as a plot device in a movie yet. You know, it's like where they, we need to go here, and it says to go to this place, but I've never heard of this place or anything, and then it comes to find out that, it's... the computer's mispronouncing the name of the city, and it's like, oh, we had it all wrong all along because the computer didn't know how to pronounce it. Because apparently computers are really good at dialects and pronouncing everything correctly.
Yes. Well, on an interesting technology note, have you seen the voice mimickers, if you will, that also do the video mimicry of... They have done a few with President Obama where it maps the mouth to the words, and you can have it say whatever you want.
Yeah, I did see that. And they sold it as like, wow, this is scary. I'm like, but at the same time, I'm like, this tech is actually pretty cool.
Oh, it's super cool, but just like any technology, it can be used for good or for evil.
Yes, just like when I was bitten by a spider. Peter Parker got superpowers. I just vomited and had muscle cramps, and I didn't know what to use that for either. So.
I power puked. So it was only good for like a day or two, too. So, weird side note, being a huge Spider-Man fan, one of the things that I've always been curious about is, so a radioactive spider bites Peter Parker with radioactive venom. He gets spider powers because of it. Your blood changes out like, every 2-3 days or something like that? It's totally new blood. How does that work? I mean, did every fabric, every cell in his DNA change and then continue to get replicated? Because isn't that like cancer? I mean,
no, say maybe that's exactly what it was. It was a very beneficial form of cancer.
Yeah, he got the spider cancer. Good job.
Yeah, I mean, once it altered the cells, and every subsequent generation pretty much replicated the mutation, and he became and stayed Spider-Man.
Yeah, and not that I want to question it. I mean, I like I said before on a number of episodes, I will happily push the I believe button because it's just a lot of fun.
It's also fun to go through that analysis, especially for me. When I learned about medicine and anatomy, physiology, and all that, a lot of sci-fi kind of started to make sense, and I actually started coming up with explanations for a lot of things.
Cool.
it's pretty awesome when you're able to do that, and it just ups the nerd factor quite significantly.
One of the things that I've always found rather curious about superheroes, like the X-Men, who are mutants, who are born that way. Okay, great. You have the ability to shoot laser beams out your eyeballs. Now, I'm just going to say, one, that would probably hurt your eyes, but okay, your mutation has allowed for those eyes to be protected. But I'm reasonably certain that you're exerting bodily energy, if you will, and I'm exhausted after running, 2 blocks or whatnot. Shooting laser beams out your eyeballs probably got to be pretty exhausting.
I'm certain. It's actually a relatively new phenomenon that I've been seeing in a lot of superhero films and any iteration of superheroes is that their powers have consequences.
Yeah.
I mean, in Marvel, Tony Stark's arc reactor that he created was slowly killing him in Iron Man 2.
Until he fixed it.
Until he fixed it. Again, like I said, it's like there are consequences to it. Wolverine, obviously, his adamantium started to poison him and he deteriorated. Especially with, Dark Knight Rises when, he was having his medical checkup and the doctor was listing off all the things that were wrong with him, and it's like, hey, being Batman has a price.
Yeah, absolutely. But being Pinocchio has a price too, and that is... your nose grows, and if you behave poorly while on Pleasure Island, you turn into a jackass or a donkey. Take your pick.
Oh, no, we're going to stick with authentic Disney vernacular. He was a jackass.
Which, point of note, we'll be talking about the language choices in this movie later on. But first, we had to find out how this movie got on your shelf. Dan?
I bought it. I'm sorry.
Well, there you go then. Dan's a little tired today, so we're just going to go with the simple answer. Went to the store. Pinocchio. I need to own this.
It's a Disney classic, and me, I'm the completist. I gotta have them all, and so this is the second major animated film?
I believe so. Yes. Yeah. Well, he was accepting Walt Disney. He was accepting his honorary Oscar statuettes for Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. He mentioned that this was in production, so I believe this was the second one.
Yeah. So yeah, this is this is classic Disney. It's part of a larger universe, and so this kind of falls into the category as how could it not end up on my shelf? I guess.
This is on my shelf because not necessarily the completionist aspect, but because it is Disney animation. My wife, as we've mentioned on, I think, the Alice in Wonderland episode, and really any movie that we've talked about that has anything to do with Disney, I've probably mentioned that my wife is a huge Disney fanatic, and we have ears all over the house, and we have all of the Disney movies, except for some of the 70s live-action stuff, so we don't have like the Apple Dumpling Gang or anything wacky like that, but we do have a couple of Disney live-action movies on the list. For our listeners, we have Condor Man and Pete's Dragon as good 60s, 70s quasi-live-action movies, live-action with some animation and live-action Disney movies, and quite a few others.
Speaking of live-action, it's like I'm surprised of all the movies that Disney is now redoing in live-action, which I just saw the teaser trailer for Lion King, which... I don't know. Looks pretty cool. It's funny. Lion King is like one of those. It's like I can, animation or live action doesn't really make much of a difference to me because it's all animated. It's all going to be CGI, so it's still technically animation.
Right.
But I'm just surprised. That was the other teaser that recently came out was for Dumbo, and that has an interesting cast and everything. So I'm just kind of curious as to. I haven't seen anything for Pinocchio yet, and maybe I just haven't found it yet or whatever. It's like again, if it's out there and I haven't seen it, then, I'm sure somebody's going to tell me. It's like, it's there.
Yeah, there have been a number of live-action Pinocchio remakes. I don't know that they have been specifically Disney, so I think you're right in the sense that they are doing all the remakes. They'll probably include this in there somewhere.
Yeah, I think a few of the one remake or I shouldn't say remake, but live-action version... They reimagine it in their own way, or they're trying to interpret the source literature a little differently. I haven't seen anybody do a Disney version remake,
right?
Live action yet. So It'd be interesting to see what the future holds for that.
Yeah, I am curious as to how they would handle it, what they would do, casting, and all the...
The thing I really wonder, and this kind of goes into the first thing I was going to talk about, is if they're going to stick with the really dark themes that this movie had. Are they going to try to, like, you know, modern it up and make it more bubbly and cloy?
Yeah, I don't know. It's funny because we had spoken beforehand that this movie is a bit darker than we both remembered, and you had rewatched it before I had had a chance to, and when I was watching it, I started thinking about the darkness that you had mentioned, sort of trying to look for it, and it's pretty dark. I wouldn't say it's terribly dark, but there's some definite nods.
Oh, you know, it's not Halloween, but, you know, it's still, you know... There are some themes in there that was just like, wow, that's just, wow.
Well, one of the things that I particularly fixated on was, again, it goes back to the era. This was it was created, or released rather, in 1940, created in the late 30s, and the value sets and the things that you could show on the screen were different. They were a lot different, in fact, and especially something that we now associate as a children's film. This was not necessarily marketed as a children's film. I mean, yeah, you could take kids to it, but it was animation for adults. So some of the things that happened in there, like we discussed in Alice in Wonderland, the smoking, you know, the fox smoking, I think Stromboli lit a cigar, the kids on Pleasure Island when they're smoking.
Yeah, come to Tobacco Road, you know, it's like, and that was a whole thing.
Yeah, the interesting thing about that is, while there's smoking of stogies in the movie, when you see Pinocchio take a deep puff of the cigar that he had, you know, he turned green and was like, oh, I'm going to put this away. So while there's smoking in there, there is a bit of an anti-smoking message sort of, you know, shoveled in there. I don't know that was particularly intentional, like don't smoke, or if it was just some people have bad reactions to cigars, so there. But there was the clocks in Geppetto's workshop sort of encapsulate the entire era. There was the child being spanked clock. There was the stereotypical drunk clock where he came out and he had a little red nose and a top hat, and he was, you know, a bottle of booze would go up to his mouth and stuff. There was the shooting, just, I forget if he was a hunter or whatnot. And then there was the one where the farmer was trying to chop the head off of the turkey, and its neck would extend and it would pull back and he would miss, and it just kept happening. So it's interesting, all of the things that we probably wouldn't want in our animation nowadays, which is generally geared towards children, to see in those movies.
It's interesting to think about, you know, because you said when it was originally made, you know, it's probably, these probably made for more of an adult audience, because I guess that's who went to movies in the 30s and 40s, you know, it was mostly adults. And, you know, we call these Disney classics, and as time goes by, they became less adult and more about the kids, but the themes didn't change.
Yeah, the movie didn't change. They didn't make a new Pinocchio and say, here's one for the kids. We just wanted to show it to our kids.
Yeah, and I don't know if it's maybe, you know, the adults feeling nostalgia. And it's like, oh yeah, I watched this when I was younger. Here, you watch this now. But that's the thing.
You're like, Well,
I mean, yeah, we watch it now, and I'm like, wow, I don't remember it being this dark and everything. But, you know, back in the 60s and 70s, they probably didn't think that. And it's like, oh, see, look how cute it is. You know, he's trying to chop the head off the turkey. Aww.
Yeah, or Geppetto's running around with a old-style wide-mouth pistol. One of the notes I made is that blunderbuss. I mean, what are you throwing, grape shot across the room or what? I've never understood that as a trope in movies. I think in the animated short Peter and the Wolf, the hunters are running around. I think one of them's got a straight pipe rifle, but they've got the big flared
the trumpet
rifle.
horn.
Yeah, and I like shooting, I like knowing things about weapons, but I never really understood that. I mean, if they're a muzzle loader, I guess, so it focuses things down and gives you a funnel built in, but it was kind of one of those like, whew, boy, that's a gun. That's a thing that Geppetto's running around with.
And then he slept with under his pillow. That was the other funny thing that I don't think there's anything particularly morally wrong portraying that. I mean, I've known people who did that. But it was just funny that, a kindly old man Geppetto sleeps with a pistol on. It's like, what kind of village does he live in that he feels the need to?
Well, I mean, he's got talking foxes and, monstrous whales and all sorts of terrible things that occur. And apparently, magic blue fairies that come down and animate lumps of wood.
Well, he opened the window for that. That's his own fault.
That's true. He did. But also, one of the things that I noticed in this movie was after the blue fairy comes down and Pinocchio comes to life and he's alive, Geppetto just sort of accepts it like it's a thing. Not even, holy beep, how did this happen? He's like, oh, look, my puppet came to life. Like, just sort of, blasé, like it happens every freaking day. Like, oh, whew, boy, I was starting to worry there for a while because none of them had come to life in a little bit. It's a Disney movie. I get it,
Actually, it's not so much that he wasn't shocked. The thing I found interesting is that immediately the next morning is like, okay, you got to go to school. Here's your books. Go, leave. Can't get you out of the house quick enough.
And he doesn't even take him to school. This is some of the things that, like, from a parental standpoint. One, as soon as Pinocchio comes to life and he realizes he's got a real wooden boy. I don't know if he can do a fake. He's got a live, an animated puppet that's no longer held down by strings.
Is he sentient or is he sapient?
Apparently he's sapient because he can think things. Anywho. But Geppetto starts dancing around the room with his little accordion, and I can't remember the exact term for that particular squeeze box, but he dances in front of the fireplace, and there's an outline of Geppetto naked, and I'm like, they got naked Geppetto in this movie. That's awesome. Yay, naked Geppetto. And then it just continues on its merry little way, but the next note that I had was the school thing. We're like, I just want to know where he was keeping this ABC primer. Let's just assume for all intents and purposes Geppetto's early 50s, maybe? I mean, based on the gray hair and the full, thick gray mustache, I'm thinking he's probably in his 50s, yeah?
That's a good, fair assessment.
Yeah. Why does he have this school book in his house? He doesn't have any kids. He's alone. I mean, was the part that I said, is there some horrible backstory about Geppetto that we don't know, that he had a wife and child and they were somehow taken away from him by some wily fox, or were they eaten by a whale? Is there some other magical creature in this universe that has caused Geppetto horribleness, and he just had this stuff laying around as like a memory, and he just refused to get rid of it? If that's the case, and he had some sort of horrible backstory and he refused to get rid of it, why does he immediately then hand it to Pinocchio? Like, well, off you go. I'm not even going to walk you to school. I expect you to magically know your way to the school, even though all the other kids that are running to school, who all appear to be about the same age, so I don't know if there's some sort of cyclical breeding pattern for this village. There didn't appear to be children of varying ages. They were all 5 or 6 or whatnot, heading off to school. Is he supposed to just enroll himself in school? I mean, is that how it works? You don't think maybe somebody wouldn't look at the little freaky wooden boy in the back and go, well, that's kind of weird?
The teacher's like, who brought the toy? And I'm like, I'm not a toy, I'm your student.
There are no strings on me.
And hilarity ensues.
Exactly. That's a movie I want to see.
Yeah, and the thing is, you're talking about all this part and everything, and those thoughts did cross my mind. But yeah, when I saw all the children going to school, and he's just, go hurry, go to school, and I'm thinking, it's like, how are the kids gonna treat him? Because did some minor research, because I'd always assumed that the village that they lived in was somewhere in Germany, but apparently it's in Italy. At least I
assume northern Italy, like the Swiss Alps, or the Italian Alps, rather, because we keep the Swiss Alps in Switzerland. Who knew?
The source literature stated it was somewhere. It was like a village in northern Italy, but still not exactly a place that embraced diversity, especially in that time. So I started to worry for Pinocchio, like, oh no, you're different, and that really don't fly in that region.
Yeah, and he didn't even have, I mean, it's lucky happenstance, I guess, that the Blue Fairy gave him the magical power to understand language, because 10 seconds ago he was a lump of pine. But if he already understands language, I mean, what grade is he going to go in? Again, how are we going to handle this?
We've got to give him some standardized testing first.
Speaking of northern Italy, which doesn't really have anything to do with Pinocchio, but watching Pinocchio and seeing Geppetto's workshop and all the woodworking that he did, I was in Florence in, 2000. I was on deployment, and we were just wandering around. We'd pulled into somewhere with an ocean or connection to the Med because Florence is landlocked. And we did a tour bus that took us down to Pisa and then up to Florence. So we had about 6 hours to walk around. And we walked into this toy shop that could have been Geppetto's workshop. It was all exactingly carved, sculpted wood to the point where they had a 1/8 size Harley Davidson motorcycle that was accurate in nearly every detail. Even the brake cables and the clutch cables coming off of the handlebars were wood that moved up and then flowed down the motorcycle body to their appropriate locations. The hand grips were, textured, and it was all made out of wood. Had I had a couple $1,000, I probably would have bought it because it was super awesome. As it was, I just ended up buying a music box with a pull-down string for the girls. It's pretty nice.
Nice.
But it was an absolutely fantastic little wood shop. And if I remember, I will go through some of my photos from that deployment and pull them and maybe post it in the show notes or on the page because it's pretty cool.
That does sound cool. It makes me kind of wonder, if there's some of these areas that Disney portrayed, if they've embraced that and says, oh yeah, this is the village where Pinocchio supposedly... I've never really heard of anything that does that, but you kind of wonder if they're out there somewhere.
Yeah, I don't know. That's a good question.
Because there's the mermaid statue for Hans Christian Andersen's, the
Little Mermaid,
the Little Mermaid, the original story. So there are monuments. There's statue for Peter Pan as well in England, but not necessarily Disney, but still,
Sure, from the actual story as opposed to the Disneyized version. Disneyized, is that a word? Can we do that? Can you verb something?
It is now.
Sure, absolutely. Well, communication took place.
I've always used Disneyfied.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Which kind of is a good segue, because the thing is like, doing a little bit of background research and everything. Yeah, I remember a version of Pinocchio that they showed on TV a long time ago when, you either saw it in the theater, you saw it on TV, or you just didn't see it. But this was way back in the 70s. And yeah, they portrayed Pinocchio, I guess now looking back, it was closer to the source material. Yeah, Pinocchio was a bastard when he first came to life, man. He was disobedient, he was...
well, he had to learn. How else do you...
Yeah, and the thing is, like, I don't remember what version it was, but it was, like I said, definitely wasn't a Disney version. But man, he actually got Geppetto arrested.
I've never actually read the source material, so I don't know, but that's amusing.
Yeah, and so here's the thing. Yeah, he was running amok. And Geppetto was like trying to discipline him and everything, and it wasn't working. And then he started crying. He cried, "It's like help, help! He's hurting me," or whatever. And the police came, took Geppetto away for the night. So Pinocchio was home alone, and felt that suddenly this is wrong because now I don't know how to feed myself and I don't know how to do anything.
Well, does he have to feed himself? He's wood.
Well, they were portraying it in the story that he just couldn't do anything to take care of himself. He did manage to build a fire to keep his feet warm, but the idiot put his feet too close and burned his feet off. Yeah, imagine that in a Disney film.
Yeah, well, they did do the finger burning thing, but it was one of those quick touch, like, oh, no.
Yeah, which really reminded me of Young Frankenstein,
Yeah.
Smoke good. Ah! But, yeah, so, it's like, again, just reading about, Walt didn't want to portray Pinocchio that closely to the source material because he felt it wouldn't make Pinocchio very likable. And I'm like, yeah, damn straight, man. People would say Pinocchio's an asshole.
Well, again, that goes to the discussion of Disneyfication or Disneyifying something. This was one of the first things that completely Disneyfied a character and said, yeah, we're just using this more as inspiration, and we'll use a couple of things that happen in it.
Yeah, but see, now you get this weird balance of where it's still, we both acknowledge this was a very dark movie. Okay, let me rephrase that. This was a dark movie. There were a lot of dark themes, but it still was Disneyfied to make the character more likable. Yeah, it's just like amazing how Disney was able to balance that.
It is an interesting balance, but I will say that of all of the Disney movies, this is not one of my favorites. It's not one of my go-tos, except for the fact that there are plenty of references in our culture to Pinocchio. The lying and your nose growing, that's stood the test of time. When You Wish Upon a Star is Disney's theme music, so obviously... I was going to
say that is the Disney national anthem.
Exactly. I think Disney employees are required to place their hand over their heart whenever they play that. But there are a lot of things in this movie that are still referred to, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it is a great Disney movie. Commercially, in the 40s, this was a flop. And it actually cost about $2.5 million when it was only supposed to cost a fifth of that.
Yeah, the thing is that I jotted down my notes to talk about is that this movie seemed like it was, and for the lack of a better term, I don't know if it's an actual term when you're talking about movies, it seemed like it was a technology showcase film. And in that, there were a lot of it seemed scenes that were a little bit longer than they should, highlighting certain types of animation. Oh, look at us pan through the village. Let's look at the scenery and how we use this technique of multiple layers of animation plates to give a feeling of depth and everything. It just seemed like they were kind of just showing off what they could do, that kind of interfered a little bit with telling the story.
Yeah. Well, the part in the movie where they go underwater and they're going to find Geppetto in Monstro, the animator for that sequence, or the lead animator rather, was actually consulted for The Little Mermaid for their underwater scenes. So if they're showcasing the technology, it worked because, 50 years later, they were asking one of the animators to come back and show them exactly how they did that so that they could recreate it, which is pretty awesome.
Yeah. Nostalgia in that. But it just, like I said, it just, it seemed like there was a little bit of interference with the actual telling of the story. Because, I was thinking that, the sequences when Pinocchio's first day out, when he was kicked out of the house immediately, it's like, okay, I'm glad that I have a new boy. Now go to school, get out of here. Geppetto needs his me time.
I'm not used to having a kid around the house. I gotta, come to grips with it.
But there was a lot of showcasing of the village and the scenery, and again, it was just like, okay, yeah, this is really nice. It's like, I guess this was a new novelty for people of the late 30s and 40s. So, yeah, I guess this is the selling. We're going to sell Disney movies this way.
Yeah, well, this is also one of the first animated movies, mainstream, if you will, big theater productions, to, I think, and I could be wrong, to put humans and talking animals in the same space. So when you get to the fox, you're like, talking foxes. All right. I know, obviously, Mickey Mouse had been around for some time, and he spoke, but I think this was one of the first times in film where the two universes, if you will, or the two things sort of met, and you had to deal with the talking fox who corrupted young children on their way to the schoolhouse and cut deals with big fat Jabba the Hutt dudes that were trying to kidnap kids and turn them into jackasses. Which begs the question, who was he selling them to? Is there some big market for asses in northern Italy that I don't know about?
You didn't read the crates? One of them. Well, forgive me. I'm not recalling if this is something I saw on the Pinocchio ride at Disneyland or if I actually saw it in the movie. I guess watching the movie, I just assumed it was the same as the ride at Disneyland. But one of the crates is listed salt mine. which means this poor fellow, this granted a juvenile delinquent, but this poor fellow is now going to spend the rest of his days being a beast of burden, hauling rocks in a salt mine.
And which, again, goes back to the horrible parenting choices made by Geppetto. Pleasure Island is obviously known about because there's some shock and just sort of fearful reaction when it's mentioned. And obviously they've rounded up a lot of kids. And it seems like there's a little more communication. Obviously, they don't have phones and that sort of thing, but I would think that the villagers would realize that there were some of their kids missing. I mean, did they think that they were sacrifices? They're just, up and disappeared? So Geppetto sending Pinocchio off alone to school takes on its own life of horribleness when there are all of these children that are being kidnapped and disappearing. Like, I'm not really comfortable with that. Maybe you could walk him to school.
Not gonna happen to my boy, no. My boy is a good boy. Only bad boys go there.
Exactly. He'll make all the right choices because he's got a cricket conscience.
And all around of 5 hours worth of human experience to draw from.
One of the things, speaking of Jiminy Cricket, which, point of note, this is his first appearance in a Disney movie, but when he was coming into the house at the very beginning of the movie, there was the spot where we were doing POV through Jiminy's eyes, and when he starts hopping towards the house, the camera actually hops with him. Mm-hmm. And it was one of those things where I'm like, is this the first attempt at, I don't want to call it 3D, but a first-person interaction in films where it's like, hey, look, you're actually the cricket. Look at you. I mean, the only other thing that would have been better is if the seats would have gone up and down, to give you that feeling like, hey, we're crickets. But is this the first attempt that you know of to do a POV shot where you're looking through the character's eyes as opposed to watching the character in the third person?
Well, to answer that, and it's just drawing on the films that I know of, I'd have to say, depending on how you define the first attempt at a first-person perspective. In the purest sense, I'd have to say no. Because in the earliest days of film, when, films were a minute long, and that was enough for people because it was such a new novelty, people put the camera at eye-level perspective. And some of the more famous shorts, that people always bring up in film school or anybody who wants to show off their film knowledge, they talk about a train entering the station.
Okay. Where
the camera was on the platform, and not directly in front of the train, but on the platform pretty close to the edge. So when the train came, people, they panicked. People in the movie theater were like, oh, the train's coming,
Oh,
And we laugh about that. We're like, ha ha, stupid people. It wasn't real, and everything. But no, it was real to them because, one, they'd never seen a moving picture before. It was a whole new thing. And two, you do the same thing except with some of the new technology. I mean, you put your face into VR and you're like, it's like I'm really there. No, you're not. It's like...
yeah.
So in that sense, in POV, I'd have to say no. But if you were to ask the question, was it the first time it was this dynamic, then I don't know because, like I said, those early films, the camera was static. This may well have been the first time where you had a dynamic first person where, the action of Jiminy hopping.
Okay.
I'd have to say that maybe, yes, that might have been.
Fair enough. It was in my notes. I was kind of curious. I didn't do any research. I was just wondering.
Yeah, I don't recall any other movie really doing that. And again, like I said, this movie being kind of a showcase. I remember the movie that came before, which we mentioned was Snow White. This was like one of the first times that they used that, and again, I forget the name of it, but if you ever see a picture of it, it's an impressive piece of apparatus where they had, the scenes were on different layers of glass. Mm-hmm. And so it was a thing that was like 10, 15 feet tall was this thing, and the camera was at the top of this tower piece, and it looked down through all the glass, and like I said, one layer of glass had the foreground, like the grass, everything, as if you were in the grass. And in the background was maybe a few bushes and everything, not covering everything, but just a little bit to frame the shot. And then ultimately, at the very bottom was the very background, which was like all the trees in the forest and everything. And it gave you this really amazing illusion of depth. that they weren't able to
Right.
achieve before then. And the other
It's
beautiful
sort of like a diorama, right? I mean,
kind of shadow box, really.
yeah, okay.
You know, and but see, the thing that was amazing about it is it wasn't that it just gave you depth. Every piece of glass, every one of those frames moved independently. So when the camera panned left to right or right to left, whichever it did and everything, the closer elements moved faster than the further ones.
Actually, they would move less, and then the other ones would move farther because of the angle and the distance would change the rate at which it had moved.
Which, you know, if you want to put that in perspective, you know, like just what that movement is like, just think of yourself flying in an airplane where you know, when you're flying in clear skies and you're looking down, the plane doesn't look like it's moving very fast, when in actuality you're moving 450 miles per hour.
Right.
But then you get through some clouds and you really start to see the speed of the aircraft and everything. So, you know, obviously, the elements that are closer are going to appear to move faster, whereas everything in the background moves a little slower. And like I said...
Right, but it's actually moving faster because it has to stay in perspective.
Yeah, so that's what was amazing about this. And again, this is kind of what they were showcasing in Pinocchio a little bit more.
It's some fantastic animation, and I know we always ask the question, or at least we did on Alice in Wonderland, and, well... I mean, The Incredibles kind of counts as an animated movie, but it's not that old. So, but on Alice in Wonderland, we asked the question, does this animation stand the test of time? And I think the answer to that question is yes. It does look dated in that it looks older, but it's still something you could look at today and go, yeah, that's impressive art.
Mm-hmm.
And the animation doesn't deteriorate much in my mind.
I don't think we look at it so much as a wondrous of technology. I mean, we don't look at it with the same eyes as we do, like, again, a VR headset. We're just like, wow, that's just so cool. But we do look at it as, like, if you have a flair for the nostalgic, like I do,
mm-hmm.
You know, I look at it as like, wow, these guys did it way back in the 40s or the 30s and the 40s and everything. I look at it that. And then you can also look at it at the aesthetics, at the artistic design of it and say, wow, that's just really beautiful.
Yeah, and the amount of work that had to go into that because they had to animate it cell by cell.
Yeah.
And I mean, they had to draw all of these individual frames, and it's impressive all by its lonesome. I mean, even if you're not a Disney fan, you know, just the animation, you know, the process that goes into it is worthy of respect.
And I think that in that sense, I think, you know, like I said, it does stand the test of time. Maybe not the same way that, you know, it did when it first came out, but it still holds something special for people who watch it and appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk about Jiminy Cricket. I know we kind of talked about the POV thing and all that kind of stuff. Jiminy Cricket, kind of a perv. Kind of a, I don't want to say a macho man, but he definitely shows what some might consider that toxic masculinity of ogling the women.
Yeah,
and,
a little bit of interspecies.
Yeah, especially the puppets. Like, that's not even... I don't want to be weirdly suggestive, but, I mean, he got wood over the wood?
Wow. And here I was trying to avoid that, you know, because I know there are some things you just can't unsee.
Well, you know, I did make the joke while we were watching it. I was watching the movie with my mother-in-law and my daughter, who is 18 now, so I didn't feel nearly as bad saying it. But I did say, yeah, Pinocchio had wood for more than 4 hours and didn't call a doctor. That's kind of a problem. Yeah, so aside from some wood jokes... the Jiminy Cricket danced with some of the animated stuff that Geppetto had created in his workshop. There was the little music box with the dancing girl, and he was ogling the puppets at Stromboli's.
Yeah, it was the French cabaret dancers, you know, who, again, another one of those things in Disney where like, wow, okay.
That's a bit of a stereotype.
That was, well, you know, I guess people would call it risque.
Yes.
Again, you gotta understand it. Yeah, when it was first made, probably not for kids. How it later became for kids, I still don't understand that, but... I
think it's, like you said earlier, the nostalgia of, oh, I remember I got to watch this, you know, oh, look, we get to see it again, we can share it with our family. And Disney is, you know, family-friendly. They made animated movies that were family-friendly, not necessarily specifically for kids, but something that families could watch with their kids. So I think there was that guilt by association thing, and Disney, as they went along, started to angle that more and more towards children. But one of the things that Disney has never stopped doing is putting adult-type references into their films, into their animated movies, so that adults can go, bah! And kids will go, bah! But it'll be for two different reasons.
I know. Yeah, I know what you're talking about. But I think I gotta just respond to though. It's like we're trying to describe Jiminy Cricket's behavior, and that's the thing. I don't know if I can really I know what toxic masculinity is, and I don't know if we can classify Jiminy Cricket quite.
Yeah, I think I just chose the wrong words, but he's definitely got that sexist sort of behavior.
Very, very much.
I think
so.
that's more appropriate.
The oogling and everything, because that was expected out of male characters at the time. That's just what you did.
And then when you rolled into the 50s, with a lot of the like wolf howls and the eyes popping out and all that kind of stuff.
But when the Blue Fairy did arrive, he did act respectful.
He did. But he knew who the Blue Fairy was, and he knew she was magic and would turn him into a turnip or something.
Or just squash him.
Yeah, she did give him new clothes, so that's nice.
Yeah, and you just want to hear Kevin Spacey's voice as Hopper going, squish him.
Well, apparently, according to the original source material of the book, as I was doing some research, it was one of those trivia things that they pointed out. In the book, Pinocchio squashes him with a hammer, basically, and then he just miraculously shows up later on in the book with no real explanation. It's kind of one of those I guess the magic cricket came back?
Magic.
Yeah. Well, he's magic. The magic obviously exists, otherwise Pinocchio wouldn't be here in the first damn place. One of the things that they did change in the original animation about Jiminy Cricket was they had him looking far more cricket-like, as opposed to the cutesy animated Jiminy that we all know and love. And Walt Disney said, I don't want to scare the kids. I want something cuter, something a little more approachable, because most people don't like bugs. But
no.
So I think some of the other things, this movie is kind of, I don't want to say disjointed, but it's definitely broken up into sections. There's Pinocchio Comes Alive, there's Pinocchio at Stromboli's, there's Pleasure Island, and then The Whale. It's pretty quick. I think this movie's runtime is about, 80 minutes or something like that? Maybe 88?
Yeah, just a little over an hour. It wasn't long at all.
Yeah, it's definitely the length of what it takes to be classified as a feature film, but it's 15 minutes, 15 minutes, 15 minutes, 15 minutes, and that's what you get. So the whole Pleasure Island thing, you're like, what the hell is this? Okay, cool. I mean, on a first viewing, I could see where people would go, oh, that's kind of odd. We're used to it now because this is so ingrained in our culture that we don't even think about it. But the fact of the matter is, that was just kind of a weird, what the hell?
It makes you kind of wonder if people were more accepting of that in the culture in the 40s than we are now. Because, nowadays, we rip movies apart on Reddit or any other social media.
Yeah.
It's like, wow, what a plot hole. Or the movie that comes to mind is the second Transformers movie where they're at the National Air and Space Museum and they knock down a wall and suddenly they're in the middle of the Arizona desert.
Like, what the hell? What?
and I remember just there were people in the movie theater going, "What the hell?" Just out loud.
That happened.
Yeah, that was just weird,
Have I mentioned my philosophy on the Transformers movies?
No, not the.
Yes, I have. They're big giant robots beating each other up, and I'm okay with that.
Yeah, but the Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum being in the middle of the desert, I'm not happy with that.
It's the Smithsonian National Arizona and Space Museum. That's why.
Ah.
Anyway, you were saying, I'm sorry, before I so rudely interrupted.
Yeah, so, like I said, it's just, nowadays we wouldn't tolerate it, man. It's like, it'd be all over social media about how this movie is so disjointed and everything, but, people don't even talk about Pinocchio nowadays, which I guess they understand it was a product of its time, and they just let it go.
I think so, and I think that if you're watching it, you understand the allegory of trying to get children to recognize that bad behavior is not something you want to emulate, and there are consequences for your actions, even though their magical donkey ear having stuff, or your nose will grow when you lie, which again has worked its way into the culture. Even the fact-checking sites are, we rate this as 4 Pinocchios. Like, oh, okay, great. I'm sure, Disney appreciates the free sort of reference to their material because they'll use the Pinocchio head image as their count. So this movie, again, while not critically acclaimed in the day or well received in particular, as a Disney movie, continues to be something that will be, I assume, watched by generations to come, because there's so many people that really strive to look for family-friendly material, and while there are some questionable things that we've discussed, it's far more family-friendly than a lot of the other movies that come out there, if you're focused on that ideally. I mean, I would classify this as a PG movie, but that's just me.
Yeah, I'm just waiting for the day when my daughter really pays attention and really starts asking questions and everything, and I'm just waiting for the day, it's like the Pleasure Island scene and everything, and it's like, when was it okay for human trafficking of children? It's like, cause,
the 40s.
Yeah, apparently that was okay back then, honey. Just watch the movie. Shut up.
Just enjoy the animation. Just don't lie. That's bad. Your nose will grow.
Just so I know, disclaimer: I would never tell my little daughter asking questions like that to shut up.
I know. It's just kind of was like, it's a 40s movie. Yeah. That's how things worked then.
Yeah, it's a funny thing. My dad used to tell me to go play on the freeway lots of times. He didn't mean it.
Exactly. Or, well, I don't know. Mine might have. So I am curious about the thematic element of the movie where Pinocchio is discouraged from going into the arts. He wants to be an actor, as has been, intimated by the Fox.
Yeah, a lot of jabs at actors in that too. Jiminy Cricket, just like, I forget specifically the jokes, but yeah, a lot of them I was like, ouch.
Like, aren't you an actor? I mean, wow. Wonder how you felt saying those lines.
Yeah, talking about actors having no dimensions or something, and it's just...
Yeah.
Yeah, again, I just have to keep telling myself, this is just a product of its time, it's...
I agree.
It's probably some people would probably classify that as a cop-out, but no, this was made in the 40s, and this is Disney.
And he cleaned it up from the original source material like we've discussed, so it's a fine family movie. And again, if you look at what was going on in the 40s, those were the social mores of the day. I mean, nowadays, I think with all the talk of gun control and all that kind of stuff, and I don't want to go down that route, but more as an idea, there's much more, we'll call it awareness of, guns in general, that they exist. And when people walk into a store and see someone open carrying, you can kind of see people look at it and go, in the 40s, we were coming out of the late 18th century with, those people that were in their teens in 1890, where there was still not quite the Wild West, but, there were still parts where people were just, packing pistols on their hip. Now they're adults, they're the grandparents who are going, yeah, just carry the pistol. It's what you do. So some like the gunplay and the things that you see in movies in that age are just a little bit different, because that's the way people thought. They came out of a more violent era. You were coming out of World War I. Those were parents, people that had survived World War I were having kids. Those are the kids that are going to see Pinocchio and Snow White by extension, because that was 3 years earlier. But that's what they were thinking. That's the way it's portrayed as the thought processes in the 40s, and then the 50s, and then the 60s was youthful rebellion, and then the 70s were a little more rebellion, and the 80s were me and all the money, and that's when people started changing. Well, it was 70s. In 60s, people started changing the way they thought about things, and that's when you started looking at all of the societal cultural differences being examined and magnified. But another aspect of that is if you look at the population of the United States in the 40s, if memory serves, it was somewhere in the 100 of millions. Now in 2018, 80 years later, nearly, we have 330 plus million people here. That's a lot of people to be having a lot of different opinions, and we've got far more methods to express those opinions. In the 40s, it was like, hey, here's your newspaper. It tells you what to think about the dirty Huns. And there were still, people who thought differently back in those days. But for the most part, this was the way it was portrayed. So, again, it's the 40s. What do you want?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I hate the phrase, but it is what it is.
Yeah, man, it's not like we can go back and change this.
Yeah, so that was the 40s. But I think that little discussion here, really kind of segues into the other thing I wanted to discuss. It was about a lot of the what do they call it? Social stereotypes. That's one of the things that I looked at, and I don't want to say I got angry or offended or anything, but it was just like, wow, that was just an unfair stereotype, man. That nowadays, gladly we know better. We don't view them this way anymore. Specifically, I think by the look of your face, I think you know who I'm talking about, who is unfairly portrayed in a way that we wouldn't portray them anymore.
Monster of the Whale.
Yes, thank you. Okay, whales are not these mean, aggressive predators.
They're not mean, aggressive, hollow things that you can live in.
It's like we see them now as, majestic and intelligent and beautiful creatures of the ocean that we can be friends with. But that was the big joke. It's like, the portrayal of whales, definitely, obviously that's changed. But, I mean, again, some of the racial portrayals, Stromboli standing out most.
That's who I was thinking of. Because really there's not that many characters in this movie. There's Geppetto, there's the fox, and the
cat.
I don't know if he was meant to be mentally challenged, but the cat, Stromboli. I cannot for the life of me remember the child trafficker's name, but the guy who ran Pleasure Island. Mm-hmm. And then the whale. That's and the Blue Fairy, but still, there weren't that many characters in the movie, so.
No.
Yeah, Stromboli was an angry gypsy.
Which, again, I kind of, knowing my history, and I'm sorry if this takes us to a place that not the best or anything, but, the portrayal of Stromboli as, we call them gypsies, referred to as Roma. This movie made in the late 30s and released in 1940, and just understanding the plight of those people, especially in that era, in that region.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it became a little hard to laugh at it, I admit. I know a lot of people would probably say, oh, look at the snowflake or whatever, but no, it's like, it's just being aware of that. Yeah, that's how we were portraying them, but understand that what was happening because of that.
Yeah, and it does give us an interesting look back into history to see where we came from and where we're going. So, from that aspect, I think it's interesting. I never really laughed at Stromboli's character, so, that was not something that struck me. The thing that, I have heard in my life is selling your kids to the gypsies. And it's kind of been, it's been a joke. There are things in our lives that we will joke about in private, and we, with people that we know well, that we will not necessarily joke about in a vast public forum. So the selling of your kids to the gypsies, that was a friend of mine and I would occasionally joke, like, yeah, you know what, I've got a plan to make a lot of money. I'm going to sell my kids to the gypsies, and then, but before I do that, I'm going to teach them how to get back home so they can come back home, and I can just keep redoing it, and it's like a continuous stream of money, until I try to sell it to the same gypsies or whatnot. But, from the standpoint of you can privately make jokes that a large group of people might not get, because in a personal conversation, you know you're joking. You know, your intended audience is well aware that's not actually how you feel about any of that, and you're not actually going to do it. You know, I've discovered, well, not discovered, I guess, rediscovered, and one of those things that social media brings to light is, if I'm talking to you like we are now, and I make a joke, you are my audience. Now, I would hope that our listeners would also appreciate that it's a joke and we know what we're talking about, but there are some things that, you know, you just don't joke about. I get that. Mm-hmm. But if you say something out into social media, if you have an audience in, like, let's say a Facebook group that has 10,000 people in it, that's 10,000 different variations on what you just said, 10,000 different interpretations. Somewhere, someone is going to take that in a direction that's not even remotely what you intended. And it doesn't matter how many times you tell them that's not what you intended, they're going to tell you, this is what you meant. I'm like, the only person who knows what I meant is the person who has my brain in their head, and that's me. So from the standpoint of, you know, the way we talk about things and the jokes that we make, you know, some of the jokes that you can make about this movie don't necessarily fly, again, on a larger scale, but they definitely fly face to face. I know that, you know, again, kind of made the wood jokes, but there are a lot of, we'll call them dirty jokes about Pinocchio. We'll call it affliction when he lies, and the relationships contained therein. But, you know, again, Pinocchio has wended its way into our hearts and minds.
It's interesting, you know, talk about, again, product of its time and everything. A bit of trivia I came across as well, kind of talking about this. It was a 1993 issue of Playboy, I guess in one of their articles. They cited 43 instances of violence and other unfavorable behavior in this film.
I've ran across that same article, yeah.
Yeah, it was like 23 instances of battery, 9 acts of property damage, 3 slang uses of the word jackass, 3 acts of violence involving animals, 2 shots of male nudity, and 1 instance of implied death.
2 shots of male nudity?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, the one you mentioned...
I know the first one, yeah.
I'm not sure what the other one was, but...
I'm not even sure.
Yeah, and 1 instance of implied death. But, yeah, and that's the thing, though. I'm looking at that, and like, yeah, we looked at it, it's like, yeah, they're the instances of human trafficking of children, sending them off to work in salt mines, you know, which pretty much implied that they went there to die.
Yep.
And it's funny, because now, again, what's the hot button issue on social media is the separation of families. Man, just hearing those donkeys going, I want my mama, you know, and I'm like, oh.
Yeah, that kind of hit me, and I thought about that. And, I mean, I kind of, again, moved to the, I'm watching a Disney movie, let's move past that. So yeah. I didn't focus on it too much, and I kind of, you know, just let it move by and moved on to the next thing.
Yeah, we'll just let that go for now.
Yes, please. Because that opens up a whole nother line of conversation that I think is better served by other venues, let's say.
Yes.
So I did read about the Playboy article, and it's interesting that Playboy would talk about Pinocchio just because it's Playboy.
Well, I think that one was interesting because at first I thought when I had read about the subject matter before I realized when that article was published and everything, and I thought it was something like from the 70s when people were really dissecting social norms and challenging those norms and making changes and everything. But 93, it's like, yeah, things were a little bit probably more established. So I think that was probably more of an article of cynicism rather than of social commentary.
Probably.
Yeah.
I was intrigued watching this movie, again, because as a child, growing up in the 70s and 80s, you saw this on your local movie channel or whatnot, or you didn't see it, or you saw it on ABC's Magical World of Disney or whatever on Sunday nights, and that was when you kind of resaw it. Or I remember, again, I think I said the same thing with Alice in Wonderland. In the summertime, the theater in my hometown would have a food drive, and you could bring down like a can of corn, throw it in the box, and go see a movie. So you didn't really see this a lot, but yet I recall all of the offshoots that I saw as a kid, and one of the things that I specifically remembered was a cartoon called Pinocchio in Outer Space, and Monstro was a flying space whale, and it was crazy, and for some reason, just watching this again made me think, was that a real thing, or am I just making that up? So I had to Google it, and it was a real thing. There was actually a Pinocchio in Outer Space cartoon, and I don't know why I'm fixated on it, but now I have to go search this out and watch it on the YouTube.
Yeah, that's it. I'd never even thought, it's like now you've really sparked, like, it's like those 2 or 3 neurons that held that memory just got reconnected. Because I vaguely remember that. Oh, wow. Boy, who'd have thought? Hey, yeah, ladies and gentlemen, you're witnessing a memory spark, yeah.
Yeah. Well, listeners, did you have your own memory spark? Do you have any specific memories of Pinocchio or Pinocchio offshoots that you'd like to discuss? Feel free to email us at the email provided at the end of the show. That was a lot of fun. I enjoyed that. There's been so many offshoots of Pinocchio and just variations on this theme that it's amazing that, again, it infused itself into our consciousness. I wouldn't even say our cultural psyche, because doesn't that generally tend to, follow a cyclical sort of thing? It's like, yeah, it's here and it's gone. But if you say Pinocchio to anyone, they'll look at you funny. But if you say Pinocchio, they will definitely go, oh, yeah, nose, lie, grow, blue fairy, yada, yada, yada.
Now, here's my question, though, because one of the more recent, if not the most recent, iterations of Pinocchio references was the trailer to Avengers Age of Ultron, where they had a modified cover of I Got No Strings, that Ultron, and Ultron referenced that. Rough percentage, ballpark figure, throw out a guess. How much of today's audience do you think understood that reference?
99%.
You think so?
And that, again, with no scientific evidence to back that up, I think that most of the audiences, a very large percentage of the audience, understood that reference. Because I don't think that Pinocchio is that far removed from our collective consciousnesses, and especially given that there have been remakes of the story since then.
Okay. Well, I mean, the remakes didn't include the song I've Got No String. That's 100% Disney right there. So. Right,
but one of the things that Disney is masterful at is remarketing their VHS, then their DVD, then their Blu-ray. So it continues to cycle back around into the entertainment, because get it before it goes back into the vault.
Oh, yeah.
And you can't get it for another 10 years, or until there's a media format change and you have to get it that way too. But yeah, so again, that's Disney masterfully markets just about everything, and I think that because they continue to re-release, it's still a part of the culture.
Yeah, I laugh at that. Get it now or before it goes back in the vault. But every now and again, Amazon still recommends these movies. On my feed. It's like, hey.
Yeah, well, you can get it on eBay, so it's all good.
Yeah, eBay, Amazon.
Yeah, do you have this on Blu-ray or DVD or VHS?
I have it. Well, my mom had it on VHS and DVD. I have it on Blu-ray.
I have it on the DVD. And just to again, a weird segue from what we were talking about. One of the biggest questions that I have about the whole movie is the time frame. We've already sort of briefly discussed that 5 hours after he came to life, he was sent to school. And then he goes to school, and he gets, we'll call it kidnapped, but he gets sold to Stromboli or something, hired. And then Stromboli takes him on his way, and Geppetto goes out looking for him. And then he escapes, goes to Pleasure Island, but we don't know how long he's there. I sort of always assumed it was like a day, because it doesn't seem like it would take that long for kids to behave badly and get turned into jackasses. So how long has Geppetto been gone? He went out looking for him, and then suddenly he's been gone for... When they look in the window, there's cobwebs and dust, and it looks like he's been gone for weeks. But it only seems like it's been maybe a couple of days? How long was exactly he gone? Because obviously Geppetto had to go back to the house to get Figaro and Cleo, so that he could get out, to go out looking for him. But how long was he gone?
Oh.
And how could Jiminy Cricket breathe underwater? That was an issue for me.
I was wondering if that was going to come up, but you early on you said it's the I believe button, and I was like, yeah, let that one go.
I mean, Pinocchio, I understand. He's wood. I mean, aside from maybe soaking up some water and some swelling, he's swole. That I didn't have an issue with. But yeah, Jiminy Cricket. I guess he really was a magic cricket.
Yeah, but kind of going back to your original question, it's like the thing is when we finally find Geppetto again, obviously he's been in Monstro supposedly for some time. He's talking about actually starvation because Monstro hasn't eaten in a while. Does he actually say how long since the fish came?
No, not at all. And I didn't know that you could live inside of a whale. I didn't realize they were hollow. Yeah, so there was no real discussion of how long Jonah was in the whale, or Geppetto, whichever one, take your pick.
Yeah. So yeah, that's an interesting. I don't think I ever really thought about that because it's just I just rolled with the movie.
Yeah, and again, having seen this so many times and now watching it as a 47-year-old adult, my kids are older. I'm not watching it sort of through their eyes. It's just kind of one of those things that makes you wonder, like, yeah, how long was he in the whale? I would assume that all the wood that came in would be wet, so it wouldn't necessarily burn. I mean, how was he going to cook the fish? Were they in salt water? Cleo's a goldfish. Where did the fresh water come from? These are my questions. These are the things I like to think about and start going, yeah, this movie doesn't really make sense. How about that? I wonder, though, if in the 40s, if they thought the same thing, like, well, it doesn't make sense. I mean, put the obvious magic and make-believe part of it aside, but there are some things, like where did the fresh water come from? Were people asking that in the 40s? Were they going, how did he live inside the whale? Huh. Yeah. Yeah. That's kind of odd. I don't know. I just, it does kind of make you wonder what kind of questions they were asking then. That, are we asking the same questions? Are we asking totally new questions? I don't think we are. I think other people have talked about this before. The movie is 78 years old, so I'm sure we're not going to hit anything incredibly new.
Oh, geez, I just had a thought when you said 78 years old. God, we hopefully, knock wood, we're gonna be alive when Disney movies become 100 years old.
Yes. That's actually kind of cool.
It is kind of cool, but at the same time, it's like, wow, because we used to think 100 years ago was something like, that's ancient history, man. That's like,
yeah, that was the Wild West.
Yeah, but now we're thinking, World War II is like freaking 100 years ago.
Yeah, World War I was 100 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, back in, God, but that's the thing. I mean, I think that's still detached enough for people of our generation don't quite get it yet. Because I remember on Facebook I posted about back in 2012 that the Titanic was 100 years ago, and nobody really kind of grasped that. Nobody said no.
No, it wasn't. That movie came out in 1998. Yes. But yeah, that is crazy. We are going to be alive when Disney movies, Disney animated features proper, turn 100. Well, actually, we've only got 10 more years until Mickey's 100, so...
Yeah.
Because he came out in 1928. I know this because my wife's email includes that number in it, so I know what year Mickey Mouse was introduced. And I think I may have mentioned this at the beginning of the podcast. My wife's a bit of a Disney fan, addict, where I would like to put everything, but she's a fanatic, so it doesn't. She doesn't listen to the podcast, which I should probably play this part for her. But anyway, yeah. So that actually covers, like I said, everything that I wanted to talk about. I mean, it's a Disney movie, and it's a thing. I do use the "there are no strings on me," or I used to, when I was referring to independent thought. Kind of like what you were talking about with Ultron, where I'm no longer being held back by something. I would occasionally sing that. Why did you do that thing? There are no strings on me.
Yeah, I can't say I've ever used that reference for myself, but I have used the growing nose. Of course, for me, my opinion, best iteration of that was an Airplane with Leslie Nielsen.
Mm-hmm.
Everything is
yes.
okay. We're gonna be fine. Everything's under control. So everyone can go on with their lives with religious fulfillment.
I cannot wait until we get to review that movie because I love that one. I wish I had the second one, but anyway, that's neither here nor there.
Yeah.
But did you cover everything?
Just a thing that I'll say, it's also very cool that Disney was able to reference its own movie and another animated movie. And I speak of Aladdin, where
yes, where Pinocchio popped up.
Yeah, where the genie was talking about, it's like, I'm going to set you free. It's like, oh yeah, sure, pop up Pinocchio with a long nose. And, it's like, yeah, liar. It's basically the nice way of calling himself a bold-faced liar. So that's kind of cool when you can reference yourself. Not as cool as Wolverine referencing, looking at a Wolverine comic in a Wolverine movie.
That was super awesome. What do you think? This is real? This is all made up?
Yeah, that was...
Except for the fact that we exist.
I mean, granted, it wasn't in Marvel Cinematic Universe, but it was still pretty cool.
I agree. Not owned by Disney. That's owned by Fox, who... in weird movie news that has nothing to do with Pinocchio and everything to do with Disney, Disney put in a bid for Fox. Comcast bid $10 billion over that bid for Fox, for 21st Century Fox. Disney has recently outbid Comcast, so there's a bit of a bidding war going on for Disney to buy Fox so that they could bring Logan and the X-Men into the Marvel Cinematic Universe, perhaps, or at least make generally better movies.
Yeah.
They should buy DC too, but that's...
This is one of the few times where I'm actually rooting for the giant mega corporation to win.
Yeah, same here.
Because I would love to see the X-Men join the Avengers. That would be nice.
Yeah, or X-Men versus Avengers. That's been a storyline a couple of times.
I have heard that. So Disney definitely going in some strange directions, though.
Yep. But back to Pinocchio, which, by the way, caused a degree of amusement around the house when I said, I'm watching Pinocchio. What? I'm watching Pinocchio. Oh, okay, cool. All right. So, since that seems to cover everything, where would you put this on your shelf?
Well, as I stated before, I think, Alice in Wonderland and numerous other occasions that all my Disney Blu-rays occupy their own shelf, which is below the, the pinnacle and everything. So this is the Disney Hall of Fame, so to say. Yeah, it goes there.
I gotta say, from a movie-making standpoint, the animation, like we said, holds up. The music has stayed in our hearts for, obviously, decades and decades. But there's a lot of flaws in this movie in general. We love it because it's Disney, so that puts it a little higher on my shelf ranking scale. But I would have to put this on the third shelf somewhere. It's not my favorite Disney animated movie. I don't watch it a lot, but I still can pretty much cite, like, oh yeah, that was Pinocchio, and refer to all the characters and that sort of thing. So, yeah, third shelf for me. It's not particularly earth-shattering, something I absolutely have to watch every now and again. It just, it exists in the collection, and I'm happy about that, and my kids have watched it, and hopefully they will pass that on to their kids and keep the Disney movie machine alive, because I do think that Disney does great movies, and I agree, we have all of the Disney animated movies, and even the ones in the 70s that most people don't speak of, we have those as well, and I enjoy those. So, yeah, third shelf. But listeners, we would love to hear where you keep it on your shelf. So again, you can contact us on our Facebook page or on our email, and we'll give you that email after we pick our next movie. So just hold on to that thought. All right, so now that we've discovered where it would go on each of our shelves, it is time once again to hit the random magic movie button and find out what our next movie is. You ready?
Ready.
The Mummy, Tomb of the Dragon Emperor.
Really? The computer couldn't pronounce emperor?
That's 2 movies in a row that we get a mispronunciation.
Your computer sucks.
It's the text-to-speech. It's Windows. Your computer sucks, too, unless you taught it how to do something else.
I just told it to shut up.
All right, so the third in the Brendan Fraser, rather, Mummy series. Yeah, okay, that'll be fun. It's got Jet Li in it. That's nice.
It has that.
All right, cool. Yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
Okay.
I don't think we've ever really talked about that movie. I mean, I think we've talked about The Mummy, because if I recall correctly, that came out around the time that we were going to the movies together, I think. Because that came out in the 90s, right? The first
Yeah,
Mummy?
but I don't think we saw it together. I remember seeing it with
Okay.
I remember seeing it with my cousin Lynn because we just kept making jokes about the Imhotep, you know.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
So.
Okay. All right.
All right.
Well, I'm looking forward to that. So, listeners, as promised, it's the big reveal on where you can email us, which is not really that big of a reveal because we are 31 episodes into the podcast. But you can contact us on our Facebook page, and you can email us at wrios2016mr@gmail.com. And with that, I will turn it over to Dan for his movie-themed goodbye. Hopefully it's not as dark as last time.
Oh yeah, so say just prove yourself brave, truthful, and unselfish, and someday you will be a real boy.
I'm a real boy. I'm a real boy. And again, speaking of cultural references as we close out, I'm sorry, but the Shrek movies had Pinocchio. So again, it's culturally been ingrained in us. All right. Thanks for that, Dan. And
wait,
listeners,
this one's
whoa, hold on.
Hey, this one's better. Cut back to it's like, well, I don't know. You can choose. I'll just choose.
Dan's getting 2 goodbyes.
Okay, well. Now remember, Pinocchio, be a good boy and always let your conscience be your guide.
Always good advice. Always let your conscience be your guide. And with that, listeners, we will see you in 2 weeks with The Mummy, Tomb of the Dragon Emperor. Thanks, and see you in 2 weeks.
Bye.